November 2025, and ladies and gentlemen, buckle up because what just leaked out of Washington, this is the kind of thing that ends careers. Not rumors, not speculation, actual emails, actual memos, actual words written by the very people who claimed that they were fighting for you and for me. But the truth is, they weren't fighting for us. They weren't fighting for you. They were using you. So tonight, I'm gonna dig into this actual leak that's so shocking. It's so cold. It's so politically rotten that even longtime Democrat voters are saying, okay, that's too far. Because for the first time, we now have proof, written proof, that the suffering during the shutdown wasn't just some unfortunate side effect. It was the strategy. And you heard that right, guys. So while families were lining up at food banks, missing their SNAP food stamps and whatnot, while federal workers were missing paychecks, TSA crashed airport lines, while veterans were stuck in limbo, while entire communities were left hanging on the thread, top Democrats were calling your pain leverage. Their words, not mine. Now, if you think that that's bad, just wait, because those leaked emails, they go all the way back beyond Catherine Clark's infamous leverage comment, way beyond that. They show Democrat operatives openly debating how much pressure they could generate, how far the suffering could stretch, and how much money they could raise from the right emotional moment. Yeah, guys, your hardship became their fundraising window. The fear became their email subject line. Your shutdown became their 2026 cash machine. And remember Senator John Ossoff? Drop a John Ossoff if you remember that guy. This is the guy who swore up and down that he was fighting for Georgia. Did anybody buy that nonsense? Well, let's just say that the leaks show something very different than that. We're talking about a full-blown pipeline of out-of-state donor money, millions of dollars flowing in from California, New York, and DC activist networks, all while Georgia families were left completely stranded. Shutdown pain in Georgia, profit on the coasts. But here's the part that nobody expected. Those leaks, they don't just expose a bad decision. They expose a plan, a very coordinated shutdown strategy that was crafted long before the cameras rolled, long before the talking points, and long before Democrats pretended that this was about protecting the vulnerable. So what we're about to go through today is ruthless, it's cynical, and frankly, it's worse than even I thought. Because once you see what was actually being said behind closed doors, once you hear the language that they use to describe your suffering, once you understand how they plan to convert shutdown pain into donor cash, you're never going to look at this party again, or the shutdown, or the Democratic Party as a whole the same way again. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get into the leak. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around until the end, because the final memo, the one that we found at the bottom of the pile, that is the one the Democrats prayed you would never see. Hit the like button and subscribe. Okay, so what kicked off all of this? It wasn't rumor, it wasn't hearsay. It was a leak that was so precise, so time-stamped, and so verifiable that even Democrat insiders are whispering that someone inside the building finally snapped. Now, these internal emails and memos, they didn't just expose chaos. They exposed the intent behind it. In fact, this is the kind of intent that it makes every American who lived through the shutdown stop and say, you know what? So we weren't imagining any of this, because these documents show the suffering wasn't accidental. It was collateral. It wasn't even collateral damage. It was the plan. Staffers openly discussed how pressure on families, federal workers, and small businesses strengthen negotiating leverage. Now, this leak matters because it confirms what millions suspected from day one. Families were not protected. They were weaponized. And so now, Catherine Clark's infamous comment, the one where she openly said families were leverage, suddenly looks like just the tip of the political iceberg. Now, just the tip, folks. And at the time, people said that she misspoke, that it was taken out of context, but the leaked emails show the exact opposite. In fact, her public statement wasn't a slip. It was a window into what Democrats were already saying behind closed doors. And we called this. Drop a yes in the comments down below if you know that we were calling this before, or if you were saying the same thing here. Okay, here's proof, guys. You're not crazy. You're not crazy. So in private messaging threads, staffers echoed the same philosophy. The longer the pressure lasted, the better the optics. The more disruption family felt, the more Republicans would be blamed for this. So Clark's quote wasn't shocking because it was extreme. It was shocking because it was accurate. You see here, the public narrative said compassion. The private strategy said leverage, and these leaks prove it. And so once you read even deeper into these leaked emails, the picture becomes even darker. Staffers weren't discussing how to resolve the shutdown. They were discussing how to maximize the emotional impact of it. So one thread shows aides talking about timing statements to coincide with peak frustration. Another discussing how missed paychecks increase pressure on GOP holdouts. Now, there were even suggestions to delay votes if public frustration wasn't high enough yet. Now, think about that, right? So rather than easing the suffering, they treated it like it was a dial that they could turn up or down for political advantage. These weren't passive observers. They were engineering panic. And every line of communication shows the exact same thing. Hardship wasn't a side effect. Hardship was the messaging strategy. Now, every family has a protector, the one who keeps everyone safe. Maybe that's you. I don't know. Maybe it's you. But who's protecting you from bad coverage is the real question. That is why I partnered with Chapter. They protect your Medicare plan the way that you protect your family. Now, one of our viewers said, Chapter made me feel like someone was actually looking out for me. So let me ask, who's protecting your future right now? Now, most people already trust Chapter and are calling the phone number at the bottom of your screen right there, which is 909-563-8279, or they're visiting askchapter.org/Ron. And speaking of that, Starlight Wow commented, Ron, I just want to personally thank you. I called Chapter today and got a great policy for 2026. I get to keep my doctor, which was so very important to me. I mentioned your name when I called, and I thank you for something to help my mind relax knowing I have great coverage. Wow, that is amazing. Now, the emails about pressure weren't damning enough. The fundraising conversations take this scandal to another level entirely. I mean, the leaks reveal staffers coordinating crisis messaging blasts with Act Blue, mapping out which demographics would respond most strongly to fear-based subject lines, and even noting which donor list would perform best on days when federal agencies announce service delays. There are explicit references to maximizing small dollar engagement during shutdown peak frustration. That ain't policy, guys. That is sales. That's the strategy, plain and simple. Pain, panic, political donations. And the most revealing line in the entire trove, a staffer saying the shutdown is generating strong donor energy, keep messaging aligned. So yes, the shutdown was never about protecting families. From day one, it was about mining them. And so to understand why Democrats lean so heavily into the shutdown, you have to look at the financial wreckage that they walked into in early 2025. So right after Kamala Harris's catastrophic 2024 campaign, the most expensive failed presidential bid in modern history, mind you, Democrat committees were practically hollowed out. In fact, they were in debt. Cash reserves were near historic lows. Donor enthusiasm had collapsed. And with President Trump back in the White House, they needed a spark to reignite their base before the 2026 midterms. Well, the leaked memo shows that the shutdown became that spark. Initial strategy notes describe it as an opportunity to reactivate small dollar donors, a chance to rebuild Act Blue momentum, and a stress event that could test emotional messaging. Translation, they didn't need solutions, they needed leverage. And then there's Senator Jon Ossoff. This is the man who branded himself as the great protector of Georgia families, the principled moderate standing against political games. But the leaked documents paint a very different picture for him. They show Ossoff's team aggressively targeting donors outside of Georgia, particularly in California, New York, and progressive enclaves along the West Coast. Now, one memo even outlines a fundraising rollout designed specifically around shutdown narrative escalation. Another email highlights a list that was called Coastal Activist Priority Donors, people who respond strongest to emotional, crisis-based appeals. Suddenly, the public image of Jon Ossoff fighting for Georgians dissolves. And so while families in the state of Georgia were caught in the shutdown's crossfire, Jon Ossoff was building a donor pipeline engineered to keep the crisis alive. And so now this next part is where the leaked emails move from unethical to outright chilling. Now, in several internal threads, Democrat staffers openly discussed dragging the shutdown out, not resolving it, not negotiating it, but stretching it. One message references holding until pressure reaches a breaking point. Another suggests delaying procedural votes to extend the public visibility window. There was even a conversation about monitoring social media frustration levels to determine optimal timing for messaging blasts. I mean, this wasn't governance. This was behavioral manipulation. And then suddenly, Karen Clark's families or leverage line, it kind of becomes painfully literal. These emails show that Democrats didn't just accept suffering as collateral damage. They treated it as political fuel. The longer the families hurt, the stronger their leverage became. This ain't leadership, guys. That was strategy through suffering. Oh, and if you're not angry yet, brace yourself, because one of the leaked memos reads like something out of a political thriller. So the document circulated among senior aides outlines how visible disruption increases donor engagement and strengthens the narrative framing for 2026. Oh, it even describes hardship as a necessary component of the broader messaging cycle. A necessary component? Yeah. Let that sit in for a second, okay? Not an unfortunate side effect, not an unintended consequence, a necessary component, meaning this was intended from the very start. So the memo details how emotional volatility boosts click rates, how unpredictability drives small dollar spikes, and how crisis language creates partisan loyalty. This wasn't politics as usual. This was cruelty used as currency. And the most disturbing part of it all, the memo concludes that maintaining public tension is essential to achieving strategic outcomes. So basically, they're planning on more of this. I'm just going to go ahead and warn you right now. So when you look at these leaked documents, you start to see a pattern. This is a pattern that has been repeating for years, and this shutdown fits it perfectly. We saw the same playbook during the BLM riots of 2020, where the movement marketed itself as a fight for justice, but billions in Act Blue money surged into Democrat coffers while cities were burning and communities suffered. We saw it again during the COVID lockdowns. Drop a COVID down below if you remember the lockdowns, folks, where the small businesses collapsed while major corporations conveniently aligned with Democrat interests stayed open and they thrived. And so now with these leaked emails revealing deliberate emotional manipulation, it's impossible to ignore the similarities. Create crisis, amplify fear, weaponize suffering, extract donations. I mean, this shutdown wasn't new. It was the latest chapter in a long-running strategy. And so then came the response. Swift, sharp, and unlike anything we've seen since President Trump returned back to office, Republican leaders immediately recognized the magnitude of what these leaks exposed. So Steve Scalise called it strategic suffering, saying that Democrats intentionally prolonged the shutdown purely for financial gain. Ted Cruz, he described the emails as proof of calculated cruelty, and Speaker Mike Johnson emphasized that this wasn't mismanagement or incompetence. This was deliberate exploitation of American families for political leverage. Their unified message was clear. Democrats didn't lose control. They used it. They inflicted pain, monitored the fallout, and monetized the chaos. And now, thanks to these leaks, Republicans finally have the receipts to show and prove to Americans exactly what happened behind closed doors. And so as we sift even deeper into this leak, one theme becomes impossible to ignore. The shutdown messaging wasn't being shaped by struggling families in Georgia, not Ohio, not Pennsylvania, or even Michigan. It was being shaped by the coastal elites thousands of miles away. The emails showed donor segmentation charts listing high-value coastal activists as the primary target for shutdown messaging. Staffers strategized around which slogans played best in San Francisco, which emotional angles resonated in Manhattan, and which crisis language drove the strongest activist spikes in Los Angeles. So clearly, these weren't people living the consequences of the shutdown. They were wealthy political hobbyists funding it. And the leaked memo showed Democrats tailoring the entire national narrative around whatever storyline kept those donors clicking donate now. Families suffered locally, but the money flowed in globally. Now, the impact of these leaks is explosive no matter when they dropped, but the timing under President Trump in November 2025 makes them a political earthquake. Now, for years, Democrats argued that Republicans were manufacturing outrage, that accusations of shutdown manipulation were just partisan noise. But now the GOP has irrefutable documentation showing that Democrats deliberately weaponized suffering to build political leverage. And so under a Trump administration that campaigned heavily on transparency, accountability, and ending Washington corruption, these revelations carry even more weight. Trump has already signaled that his administration will not let this slide. And Republican lawmakers are lining up behind investigations, hearings, subpoenas, and possible ethics referrals. The narrative has slipped. The moral high ground Democrats claimed for years has just collapsed overnight. Now, for years, Democrats branded themselves as the party of compassion, the protectors of the vulnerable, the guardians of working families. But the leaked emails tear that entire narrative to pieces. In public, they spoke softly about standing with families, fighting for the impacted and doing everything possible to resolve the shutdown. But in private, the documents show political calculation, very cold strategy, and a breathtaking level of indifference. Staffers measured human suffering like a data point. They discussed pain as useful, disruption as expected, and frustration as politically advantageous. This is the emotional payoff of the leak. The mask shatters. The warm, empathetic speeches, they were nothing more than a facade, a fake. And behind them was this machine that viewed Americans not as people, but as leverage. And so here's the irony, guys. The suffering, the strategy didn't just fail morally, it failed politically. According to conservative analysts, Democrats walked away from the shutdown with almost nothing to show for it. I mean, they didn't secure the policy wins they demanded. They didn't gain public sympathy. And once the leak surfaced, the narrative flipped against them with historic force. Polls showed a sharp swing in public sentiment, especially among independents and moderate Democrats who feel manipulated and misled. Republicans now have both the narrative and the receipts, and Democrat strategists are scrambling. What began as a calculated attempt to generate leverage for 2026 has instead become a catastrophe that weakened their credibility, damaged their fundraising apparatus, and handed President Trump's GOP a massive political victory. So what happens now? Well, according to senior GOP figures, these leaks are only the beginning. There are already calls for formal investigations into whether Democrat leaders intentionally prolonged the shutdown for financial gain. I think we already know the answer to that. But House committees, they're now preparing the subpoenas. Ethics complaints are being drafted, and pressure is mounting on Catherine Clark, John Ossoff, and several key staffers to answer the language for these emails. Even Democrat insiders admit privately that the fallout heading into 2026 midterms could be brutal. Voters don't forget when politicians deliberately weaponize their suffering. And with President Trump pushing a renewed transparency agenda, the spotlight on this scandal here isn't going anywhere. The question now isn't if accountability is coming, it's how deep will it go. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these leaks didn't just expose political strategy, they exposed who was telling the truth the entire time. So while families hurt, Democrats calculated. While Americans begged for relief, Democrats weighed the benefit of prolonged pressure. And while the country waited for leadership, Democrats waited for better fundraising metrics. Now the mask is off. Now the receipts are out. And now America knows exactly who used the shutdown to climb politically and who actually fought to end it. Now, if this doesn't wake voters up heading into 2026, nothing will. Like, subscribe, share this video everywhere, and stay tuned, guys, because if these leaks are any indication, a whole lot more is coming.